Welcome back. After 2 years of long hiatus, we're finally back on the political podcast. Myself, Tobias, and George. And today we have another special guest, the newly elected member for Point Cook, Matt Hilakari. Matt, thank you for joining us.
No, thank you guys. It's a real pleasure and really appreciate being the first person in a couple of years. What a good introduction. So I'm
Yeah,
very honoured to be a candidate still in Point Cook. So the VC is yet to declare the election, but it's looking pretty good, I got to say.
yeah. So, Matt, we'll get straight into, I guess, the questions. The first couple of questions we've asked, I guess, are more, I guess, get to know you and for the audience here, probably the people of Point Cook, to understand who you are and like why you ran the seat and maybe who your political hero is. So we'll start off with what made you decide to run for the seat of Point Cook? And yeah.
Yeah, so I guess I've been in politics in the Labor movement for almost 20 years now, but that wasn't really what led me into politics. So what led me into politics was my upbringing. And there's a few sort of critical parts in that. So the first was when I was really young, so, talking 10, 11, and Jeff Kennett was the Premier at the time, who was the Liberal Premier. My mum was a nurse, my dad was a park ranger. And what was going on in the public service at the time was a lot of people were losing their jobs. So that made me really worried, and I didn't speak to my parents about it at the time, but I went to bed worrying about our future. And this doesn't happen much anymore, but park rangers at the time used to live on site in parks. So it wasn't just, my dad's job, it was also where we lived. So it was really sort of one of those things that sort of, in my mind stuck in there. And, as I've grown up, I thought, well, why is it that people should face those circumstances where they're worried about, their financial future, where they're going to live? The second thing that really brought me into politics was when I was about 13, 14, I started volunteering on camps for people with disability. And these camps were, this is before the NDIS, by the way. So really a lot of people's life experiences, if you had a disability, were based on charitable activities, whether that's family or friends or people in the community. And as a person, I was able to help out and, give the same life experiences as their peers to, one person at a time, for a couple of weeks of the year. But government's got the opportunity to change the whole of people's life experiences. The NDIS has been, there's critiques of it, and some of those critiques are very fair and we can always do better. But that's a life-changing experience for a whole bunch of people to properly experience life like everybody else. So, we set up a charity, a bunch of, young, there was a bunch of teenagers at the time. But again, like charitable works, don't replace government work. And so government's, really transformative for people. Because the third thing was, when I was, just taking my first jobs, I was a cleaner at the MCG. So, think about the MCG after a cricket match or a footy match, just like pies and chips and filth all over the ground. Well, I was the guy that was cleaning that up. But alongside me were a whole bunch, and that was a teenage job, right? So that was just pocket money. But for a whole bunch of people, if they got a job that night, they got to work to do this pretty filthy job. They then got to, experience life's good experiences of the week, eat well, have a place to sleep. And again, I go, geez, like, what sort of society are we building where those aren't the life experiences that we have? So, of course, you think about those experiences, and of course, I'm going to end up in the Labor Party, right? That's just natural. And of course, then I'm going to want to be involved in government and how we make transformative changes, not just, the little things, but really big things, so beyond the individual. So, that's what got me involved in politics. Why Point Cook? Right. Well, I think it was a lot of luck, really. So we were moving, my family was moving to the western suburbs. We're closer to family. We've got a young son. So, you reassess life and you go, well, I'm going to move closer to family who are in Geelong and the western suburbs. And Jill Hennessy at the time announced her retirement. And I went, well, let's go for it. Me and my partner talked about it. And, as it was, the members locally embraced me, and then I started to work hard, and here we are now. That was probably a longer answer to your question than you wanted, but we've got a little bit of time. How long have we got on this podcast? Is about 4 hours?
Probably maybe around 40 minutes or so. So yeah,
40 minutes.
I guess
Okay,
that would,
I'll cut
yeah,
down the rest of them.
yeah. So I like the as you talked about with Jill Hennessy. So we back 2 years ago, we contacted Jill Hennessy around some of the I guess COVID relief stuff and some of the stuff that the Victorian state government was doing. And yeah, she sent us some written responses, which was really good of her. And yeah, it was pretty helpful towards our podcast then. So we just looked over them and I guess discussed it between the three of us. So yeah.
Oh, fantastic. Well, I hope to be, as proactive as well.
Yeah. So another question, I guess, relating towards your political background, I guess, and yeah. Who would you say are your political heroes? It could be Australian politicians or it could be international.
Yeah, certainly. So, I mean, it's pretty hard to walk past Gough Whitlam as a bit pretty seminal figure in Australian politics. So, a person who, he only actually stayed in Parliament as Prime Minister for less time than Julia Gillard. And you guys would all, remember to a degree Julia Gillard and, the relatively short time she had in Parliament. Well, Gough Whitlam had less, but achieved so much, got us out of Vietnam, set up universal healthcare, universal education in terms of tertiary. So he did some of those really big projects, but he did some of those things that were just important for everyday life. So in the western suburbs of Melbourne, western suburbs of Sydney, he put sewage in, right? Not something that you think is like, amazing, but think of how life-changing that is, actually having sewage in terms of health improvements, in terms of not needing a truck to come along and, fix up the sewage all the time, like just simple things like that had a life-changing effect, particularly on people from working class backgrounds. So he's a bit of a hero, but he's also not someone, he's not perfect, right? In politics, there's no perfection. And, there's a lot of challenges that he faced both as a leader and some of the decisions as a leader. So it's not necessarily looking through these things with rose-coloured glasses, but, he'd be one I'd nominate.
Yeah, that's a good answer. As well. I do also remember I've done a little bit of research around, politics during the 1970s and stuff. And I believe Gough Whitlam was one of the politicians was pushing towards the end of the White Australia policy, and one of his I guess one of his members of his cabinet, I forgot his name just now, but he was I guess I forgot his name, but he was the Minister for Immigration during that time, and they call him now, I guess, the father of multiculturalism. Do you know who that is, or?
Look, I won't remember the name off the top of my head, but there's a mixed, experience within the Labor Party, right? The party was involved in the White Australia policy, of course, right? The Labor Party, but I think one of the things that we've spent a lot of time on, both in reflection and then actually doing, is changing our stance very strongly towards being absolutely pro-multiculturalism, celebrating it, putting it really firmly at the heart of everything we do. You would have maybe seen this week that the first Muslim female minister has just been appointed in Natalie Suleiman to the Victorian cabinet. And that's just another great step forward of saying, well, here's the first, but absolutely not going to be the last, because we want a parliament that is representative.
Yeah, of course, because as we know, Australia is one of the most ethnically diverse countries in the world. And the next question actually that we have for you is a lot relating towards what we were just discussing before. I believe, George, you're going to be asking this question to Matt.
Yeah. So my question is, Australia, as we know, is one of the most ethnically diverse countries in the world, and recently, according to the 2021 census, Point Cook was found to be the most diverse suburb in Australia. What role do you think diversity plays in the Australian society, and how should Parliament, Victorian Federal, reflect this diversity?
Yeah, thanks so much, George. And it is one of the great opportunities, multiculturalism. It brings us connections all over the world, which is good for, business, but also good for how people feel and bringing people into the community. As a party, our embrace of multiculturalism is some of the way along the line, but still has more work to do. So, we've got members of parliament from with Chinese background, with Cambodian background, with Sri Lankan, with Turkish, Italian, Greek, Aboriginal background. And we have candidates from a series of other countries as well, India, Pakistan, So we have a wide diversity of members elected candidates to Parliament, but we're not there yet in terms of that representation. And so if you think about some of the history of the ALP in Victoria, we've probably over the last quarter of a century made great strides in terms of female representation. And we're seeing, cabinets with 50% females, plus we're seeing parliaments elected out of Victoria with 50% female plus from the Victorian ALP. The other parties do things differently, but for the Victorian ALP, that's been a really important thing. And the next conversation, and the conversation that's been started and ongoing for a while now, is how do we increase our diversity? And it goes back to, being a representative, right, of a community that has the most diverse suburb in the whole of the country. Something, that makes me incredibly proud, but also, it's quite an honour to be representative of that. So then it's also, how do we bring more people through the party who are just not white blokes? Now, I say that as a white bloke, and I've got to spend my time actually working hard to make sure it's just not a replication of myself in terms of parliamentary representation, staffing, all the rest. But we're a little way along. We've got some really great diversity. A couple of those are ministers as well. So it's not like we've not seen the promotion, but we've still got more work to do. And I think everybody in the party recognises we've got a bit of a way to go still.
Yeah. So
of course, Melbourne's the home of multiculturalism, right? You all know that.
I also, for all three of us come from multicultural backgrounds. So for myself, I'm half, my mother's from the Philippines and my dad's Australian. And I guess Tobias and George, if you want to maybe talk about what your multicultural background is.
My mum is Indian and my dad is from Dubai, so it's a bit of different. George?
Yes, my family's from India.
Which part of India are your family's from?
They're from South India, a state called Kerala.
Yep.
Mine's from Chennai, so yeah.
Yeah, great. Yeah, and from the Philippines? Whereabouts from the Philippines?
So my mum's from a central province called Tarlac, so it's about 2-3 hours from Manila. And
I'm glad you gave me a Manila reference. I haven't been to the Philippines, but I hope to go one day. I'm probably the first candidate. I think the first candidate in Australia to be elected from a Finnish background. So that's a group that I don't think would have even made within the census. You've got to have 20 people from a background to be counted as part of their multiculturalism. That's how the census counts it. And so I don't think there's even 20 people from a Finnish background in Point Cook, but there is a Finnish hall just down the road. So, a bit of difference there.
Yeah, because I think I was reading up before a little bit about your background. Your grandparents on your Finnish side came here was that the 1950s and 60s or during that time?
50s. Yeah, so both my parents migrated. So dad's side Finland, mum's side from England. And they did what every other migrant did, which is look for a better life for themselves, their children. I don't think when they came via boat, of course, right? I don't think when they got off the boat, they would have expected that their grandchildren would be potentially, running for Parliament, likely to be elected to Parliament. They were just hoping for something better than leaving, basically a post-war, relatively impoverished Europe. And they've made better lives for their children. So, so both my parents were born overseas, but, migrated very young. But, they had, particularly the Finnish side, they didn't speak a lot of English when they first came. They took all the odd jobs that they could. It wasn't a particularly easy life, a lot of moving from place to place, from state to state, but they made a good life. And, I think about the generation now, and each of the kids are, really doing good stuff with their life, and, it can make a real difference. So, I'm pretty thankful for Australia to give us those opportunities, because, I don't think we would have those same opportunities if we're in England, if we're in Finland. Although Finland's pretty great and England's pretty great too, of course.
Yeah, we think we all know about the Finnish Prime Minister now. I think she's one of the youngest political leaders in the world, I believe, elected as well.
Yeah, spot on. Yep.
So now we'll get more into towards policies that Matt and the Labour Party have brought up, and some of, I guess, the Liberal Party and in the independent Joe Garra has brought up during this election campaign. So Tobias, I believe you have the first question to ask Matt.
Yep, I do. How will the funding towards local footy and cricket clubs help the electorate of Point Cook?
Yeah, certainly. So we did a few announcements. I'll talk about one, for a bit longer than the others. So we put 1.4 million into the Point Cook football club and cricket club facilities. And one of the things that we really lack in Point Cook is actually a big meeting space. So if you look across the suburb of Point Cook, there's lots of good community facilities, but usually they're quite small. And what the football club wants to see is have about 300 person rooms to have, events and dinners and club nights and all the rest. But this is much bigger than anything else in Point Cook presently, except for one private facility. And so this is about building not just good spaces for football clubs and cricket clubs. This is about building good community spaces. I was struck pretty, it's pretty hard, some of the stuff, when you don't have big spaces. So Friday prayers, for example, for the Islamic community in Point Cook, they're held in the library in town centre, and which is really great. Those facilities are available, but they're just not big enough. So you have people, praying in the rain when it rains because they have an overflow outside the door. And so when that happens, you need to change the spaces that exist because those spaces weren't really built into the planning of Point Cook. And that's a bit of a downside in terms of planning here. And we need to rectify some of those things for the other clubs. Leverton Footy Club, we put in 1.3 mil. That's about upgrading facilities that are tired and old, making sure they've got scoreboards and things like that. For the Point Cook Central Sporting Club, that's hiring the Oval next door. And that's about financial viability for the club. The club had a ripper season. Their women's, their men's both won the grand final. They're doing really well in terms of their netball support. But sometimes these clubs, if you don't have facilities close to them, an extra ground, a big club room, they can find it really hard to grow and meet the demand of, what is a growing community still in Point Cook.
Another question towards that response is, what are some of the positive mental health effects of playing sport for the people of Point Cook?
Yeah, I think I remember when I grew up, playing basketball. It was good in terms of, I still play basketball, in fact, now, and we lost by 2 points last night, which was an outrageous shot, I'd say, after the siren. But the referees called it before the siren, whatever. The refs make the call, right? You've got to live with it. But what it brought me was, good sense of community around me. I was playing basketball a couple of nights a week, training a couple of nights a week, met new friends, played with my friends from primary school all the way through. These are really good things to build good communities. And for parents as well, it brings them together in a community as well, gives them opportunities to volunteer and be involved in a really local way. Because sometimes, particularly, we've come out of a period where we've had a lot of time at home. Rebuilding those connections across communities is incredibly important. And the clubs in Point Cook are really good at doing it. Like, to their credit, they've got great volunteers working really hard. And we just need to be there to back them in, give them a bit of support to make these things work.
Yeah, good answer there. So now I think George has a question here, and this is, I guess, relating to one of the other candidates, Joe Garra, one of his policies that he brought up during the election campaign. George, if you would like to talk about it.
Yes, so Joe Garra, a fellow candidate, had addressed the issue of the lack of high schools in the area and had mentioned that he will build a new high school in Altona Meadows. Do you intend on taking action on this issue?
Yeah, this is one of those issues that came up really straight away after being pre-selected as a candidate for Labor. And so I've been working with the people in Altona Meadows, with parents there in particular, who are thinking about, well, our kids are in primary school at the moment, and what are our options in terms of going to high school? And through the requirements of the Department of Education, they're split across a series of different schools. So, up to Laverton, over down into Point Cook, into some of the high schools, and some of them over into Altona itself. And so there's a bit of an issue around the lines that are drawn on maps. And I think we can do some work on that. And I'm already engaging the Education Minister on that. There's also, we're a bit beholden to our history, right? You know, all planning decisions, we're a bit beholden to history. So if you think about Laverton as a community, it's about 9,000 people. And if you think about Altona Meadows as a community, it's about 25,000 people. If you started from scratch knowing that and thinking about that, you'd have a high school down in Altona Meadows and you'd have a primary school up in Laverton. But we've got the opposite, a couple of primary schools, at least state primary schools, down in Altona Meadows and a high school over in Laverton. So there are some challenges there and we're going to have to work through it. But one of the defining features is always population. You know, so we have massive population growth down in Point Cook, massive population growth in Wyndham, you know, to the extent that in the last budget, 6 out of 13 schools that were funded for construction were in the Wyndham City Council area. And so we're not seeing that same growth in Altona Meadows, just yet at least. So there is a challenge of how do we use the state's resources best? How do we make sure people can get access to good high schools? And then how do we support, probably the most important part of education of all, is supporting great teachers just to do their job. Because teachers really define, if we think about the really great schools in the area, you know, we always think about also at the same time, the great principals, the great teachers. So how do we support them up and build great schools? So there's a bit of a challenge with Altona Meadows because it is divided in such a way, and it is, you know, you can see how the freeway blocks things, Skeleton Creek blocks things, Laverton Creek blocks things. So it's a little bit of an island. How do we make sure that things are easy there and there's great schools to go to? So I'm not saying we'd probably build a high school there. You know, the numbers I don't think sustain it, but that's a pretty ongoing conversation, particularly with parents locally who, you know, want what every parent wants, which is the best education opportunities for their kids.
Yeah, so just on that, how long do you think that this issue could take to find a solution?
I don't think any education solution's ever solved. You know, they're actually ongoing issues that you need to work on. If I think about my own high school, right? So I went to high school in Templestowe College. It used to be Tempe Tech, so it was, you know, one of those schools that got merged under Kennett. It was a good, reasonable school when I went through. You know, reasonable reputation. After I left there, it went really downhill. And now it's gone uphill again. So education isn't sort of I think an issue where you sort of just tick the box and it's done. It's one of those ones you got to keep working at, keep funding, keep supporting teachers. So it's hard to say there's going to be a finishing point other than we want to actually just keep working at it, making those education opportunities available. Good facilities in the area, good teachers in the area, but there is a disconnect between how the area is zoned.
Yeah, I think that is a main issue, I guess, within our area, I guess, with schooling. But, you know, as you said, I don't think, I guess, with schools, like the issue's never going to go away. There's always going to be in new areas, for example, there will always be schooling issues. And, you know, some people will say that the schools there aren't as to a higher quality as others. And yeah, that'll always be an issue.
And we've got these great schools like Alamander, which actually the problem there is overpopulation. And how do we meet the needs of students there in a very high density school? You know, one of the things that we came to the election with was a commitment around 2 more schools, you know, a special school as well as another P9. You know, I'll be pushing pretty strongly to make sure that P9 is a place that attracts students so that we take some of the pressure off places like Alamander and Saltwater. Saltwater, you know, just opened in very recently, already at, you know, getting close to capacity. We're putting in some more double portables in there to replace single level portables. The school loves those, right? But, you know, because they're high quality. But at the same time, it just demonstrates that there's lots of students and we're a really young population in Point Cook, right? You'll see more people around your age in the area than almost any other area across the state. So with that young population, we've got to meet that need.
Yeah, so now we'll start, I guess, to talking a bit more about roads and infrastructure projects that the Labour Party has supported and is going to do in the next 4 years. So, Tobias, I believe you have the next question.
Yep, I do. Um, how how is the Labour government's infrastructure and road project like the Westgate Tunnel project and especially the upgrade to the Point Cook Road / Snides Road intersection gonna help local citizens going to the city every day?
Great. And look, this is the key question that most people ask me across the whole of the electorate. I knocked on or called, at least 8,000 people across the community. This was the number one issue by far: getting around, roads, getting to the city, congestion, safety on roads. So the Point Cook Road, Snides Road, that's all about safety. It's making sure people can get through that really difficult intersection. Are you guys all learner drivers at the moment?
I'm learning right now, so
Learning
I'm
right
getting
now, yeah.
I'm getting my permit, so it should be soon.
Yeah, should be soon. Francis,
Yeah.
George?
Yeah, I'm just working through, I'm gonna do the test in a couple of days, so I'm just working through the modules that are online.
Okay.
So yeah.
Good luck with that. Yeah. And George,
Yeah.
where are you up to on driving?
Yes, I just like recently finished like 50 hours in that house. So yeah, I'm just like driving.
Yeah, great. Well, look, I mean, you guys would know driving, particularly Point Cook Road, is difficult, but Point Cook Snides Road intersection is dangerous. The intersection of Point Cook Road and Central Avenue, again, dangerous. We had 12 serious accidents in 5 years in that intersection. I avoid driving through Point Cook Road and Snides Road because it's so dangerous. Like, I go up Jefferson's Way to avoid it. So it's one of those things that I prioritise, Labor's prioritised, is getting these intersections safe, and then we've got to get on with congestion. Now, the Westgate Tunnel's one of those congestion improving. If we think about large volumes of traffic, we're never going to have, a 2-minute drive to the city, but this one proposes to slash about 20 minutes off the drive into town. Particularly as we remove all the roadworks, as we get tunnels done. It also gives an alternative route into the city, right? Because at the moment, we've just got the bridge. That's it. And otherwise, it's the back streets all through the western suburbs. So this gives a main arterial route that diverts some of the traffic all the time, particularly trucks off local roads, but it gives a main arterial route for all the time, which is one of the things that we've been crying out for in the West, because if you get a crash on the Westgate, everything is at a standstill. It can take up to 3 times as much time. You guys would have known this, when you've been stuck in the car. Hopefully not while you've been doing your learners, but while you've been stuck around the joint. So it's a pretty critical issue to get it right. But also the Labor government's been getting it right on a series of entrances to the freeway. So if you drive down Palmer's Road now, you just don't get stuck there. It's a great entrance to the freeway. Same with Boardwalk, Snides Road, Duncan's Road, and Werribee South. These have all been upgraded. It's really Point Cook Road, the critical one we've got to get right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think just quickly, I've heard a lot of talk about also there's been a lot of problems, I guess, exiting out of Point Cook. So on the Point Cook bend especially, I've heard some people talking about how, the traffic there can take almost 30 minutes just to get out of Point Cook Road. Do you think also the Labor government will address this issue towards the future?
Yeah, so we've got a Wyndham Roads package, which was announced towards the end of the election cycle, I think maybe 2 or 3 weeks before the election. Multi-million-dollar package looking at roads in Wyndham and those that are connecting to Wyndham. That's our real chance to work out, how do we, either widen. I don't think we can double Point Cook Road without knocking over houses in the Seabrook end. So how do we, look at options of potentially widening, whether that's a, multi-directional middle lane, and have a 3-lane road like they have in Albert Park, a multi-directional middle lane on Queen's Road. How do we get onto the freeway without getting through Laverton? Like, are there any options for a flyover? So this multi-million-dollar road package will look at how do we actually improve what is the last really big road project that we need to get right in Point Cook. But also, really, if we went back in time 25, 30 years, it should have been the first one we did, but we haven't. So now we've got to go and do it. So, you know, we've got the first two projects, get rid of the dangerous. The second lot of it is decongestion.
Yeah, so just quickly here, Matt, our Zoom.
You should be able to. Yeah.
Yeah, so welcome back. We just had a little break there in between some of the questions. Yeah, we'll get started.
It's great
again.
to be back.
Yeah, it is great to be back. Just, you know, you got to have a little break in between an interview. You can't be talking for a whole 30 minutes straight.
That's not what the expectations are. They've got me talking underwater pretty soon.
We could. So yeah, we'll get back towards the question. So I believe I have the next question. So this one is relating to more towards Liberal policies. So from the past election, the Liberal Party has promised to end Labor's toxic soil dump in the Western suburbs, as they quote unquote call it. Does the Labor Party also believe that the dumping of toxic soil in the Western suburbs should be discontinued?
Yeah, I think certainly there was an ombudsman report that followed, you know, some of the discussions and how the EPA engaged with community and consultation. I think that's a real lesson to learn out of, you know, previous things that we've done. And, you know, no government's perfect. We've got to learn, you know, how we better consult, how we better engage community. But certainly there's no plan for any other sites across the West.
Yeah, because over the past, I guess, couple of years, there has been a lot of talk around, I don't know specifically where it was, but I do remember there were a lot of protests around the Werribee area, around the toxic soil being dumped around houses. And I do believe I heard that it's being dumped in the Sunbury area. Is that true, or?
Yeah, so the EPA has identified 3 sites to use. But there's been a little bit more of a development and understanding around the soil itself coming out of the tunnel, and there's a lot less concern than there historically was about it. It's one of those things about you've got to take a little bit of time to test the soil. Like all of the soil in Melbourne, and particularly in Melbourne's West, has had industrial uses over the top of it, and a lot of those industrial uses over time never actually recorded, you know, what are we using? What's leaking and seeping into the soil below our industrial uses, and what effect that has over time. Because remember, in a lot of these projects and these, you know, manufacturing that really set up Melbourne's West, people just weren't thinking about it, or the knowledge just wasn't there. So there is a challenge of, you know, we're beholden to our history, right? Again, which is we've had industrial uses all over the West, and, you know, particularly the inner sort of West. What is it? What do we know about it? How long does it take to learn about it? And this is one of those things about science. It's always evolving in terms of our knowledge of it, and knowledge of the impact. So it's going to be one of those challenges that we just have because of our history. But certainly Labor is going to keep working hard on it, and keep making sure communities are made safe. You know, and we just have to work with the past that we have.
Yeah, I think that's the main key thing, because as we know, a lot of the Yarraville Altona area has been, over the past, there's been a lot of manufacturing, and especially with the refinery in Altona, a lot of the soil there would have been affected due to, I guess, like the manufacturing work there. So yeah, yeah. Now we'll,
I guess,
yeah.
In that stepping forward, it's what can we do about the future, right? So things like all the bus services, all the new buses that we buy from 2025 will be electric buses or emissions-free buses. You know, building the SEC, you know, the great next step environmental standards of electricity produced by wind and solar, proven technologies that work as we transition away from brown coal. Like brown coal was actually, as a technology, was a really Victorian-led technology of using what is hard to manufacture electricity from brown coal, happening all through Latrobe Valley. But also things are moving on, and we're going to have to embrace wind power, solar power, which is what we're doing. So those things are happening, but also we've got to put the effort into it, and we've also got to believe the science. some people in some other parties maybe aren't quite there yet on understanding where the world is going.
Yeah, because as we know, the whole world, we are entering now a climate crisis, and there are still some political parties. I don't want to name names, but there are some that still
The
don't believe
Liberals
that
and the
it's happening.
Nationals.
Yeah. And and your small right-wing parties as well, your smaller little right-wing parties.
Yeah.
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 So yeah, we'll get back now to some more Labour policy questions. Tobias, I believe you have the next question.
Yeah, I do. How is potential Labour funding Point Cook Community Hospital going to benefit the citizens of Point Cook?
Yeah, great. This is one of those ones that I think is going to be a real improvement for people in Point Cook. So there's a few elements to it. It's on Dunnings Road, just next door to the McDonald's, where the circus is usually over summer. So the circus is going to have to find a new home. That's okay. We'll find that. But it'll do things like, so community hospitals are those hospitals that don't involve emergency. Because if you think about the site that's there, it's not big enough. It's too close to houses to be running emergency departments. So over in Werribee Mercy Hospital, we're doubling the size of the emergency department, which will see thousands of patients extra per year. But over in Point Cook, which is being run by Western Health, community hospitals typically do things like dialysis, day surgery, maternal child and health services, those things that you actually really want close to home. So we're working with Western Health at the moment in terms of the service offerings that they'll have. But the other side of it is it's a great little employment hub. And I know we're going to probably talk a little bit more about employment in a couple of moments. But if we think about the whole area of Point Cook, we actually want some more employment close to home. So this will be great for those nurses, for those doctors who, can get to work easily, but provide great services for the community.
Yeah.
Yeah, so now we'll move, I will move again towards some of the other policies that other candidates within the Point Cook electorate have talked about. So George, I believe you're going to be talking about the Eastern Werribee precinct specifically.
Yeah, so the question that I had was, so Joe Gara and Angela Newhouse to mention about the development of the grassland on the west side of Hackett's Road, which is known as the Eastern Werribee precinct for high-tech industries and hospitals, so that residents can work near their home. Do you think this development is a good idea?
Yeah, I think it's great and it's pretty essential. So if we think about the original plan, it set out about 60,000 jobs to be incorporated into the East Werribee precinct. Little bit of housing, some great community facilities alongside it. And the Victorian Labor government at the last budget, so this is well before the election, well before anyone made promises on it, put $2.8 million aside for further planning. And so this is to update those plans and bring them forward a bit since they were last done probably just on a decade ago now. And what I want to talk about, particularly with those planners, is how do we make something great in the western suburbs, something we can be proud of. So it's not really what I want to see there, but it's what, as a community, what we want to see there. So the area itself is about 4.5 times the size of the Hoddle Street CBD grid. So it's a really great piece of Victorian government-owned land that can be developed into something great for the Victorian people, but great for the western suburbs. So got to be lots of jobs, as a fundamental. Got to be not a lot of housing because we've got lots of space for housing. Point Cook's, packed full of great housing. Tarnee, Truganina, Werribee, all these areas are developing or developed. Got to be a great place for jobs, but what else can we think of to make this a real something everyone in the West can be proud of and really defines the West? So that's my hope for it. I hope people can be brought along with that, and we can, as a community, say, "Hey, this is what will make the western suburbs great, and particularly the southwestern suburbs." So very supportive, and government already on board.
Yeah. Yeah, so just on that, how do you think that this will benefit the area, especially this area, this development will benefit the area?
Yeah. Jobs close to home. That's the fundamental thing. Is, if we think about the people in Point Cook, highly educated community, one of the most educated in all of Victoria. Often needing to travel to the city, although work patterns have changed a little bit. There's a lot more work from home and, a lot more ability to do that. But it's close to us, right? So that's why that's the fundamental thing, is it's close to our community and we need the jobs there. It's going to take a bit of time, right? To get really good things right. It takes a little bit of time, but that's the fundamental thing, jobs close to home.
And yeah, just quickly on the Eastern Werribee precinct especially. I do believe I was listening to just a couple of days ago. I was listening to the radio interview with you, Angela, and Joe with Ralph Epstein, and I do remember Angela was talking about how one of the Liberal policies was to build a children's hospital within the Eastern Werribee precinct area. Do you believe this is also a good idea for that area, for that specific precinct area?
Yeah, I just think with all of the Liberal commitments that they made, they were underfunded, underthought through, and it was just a pattern that they had. So, I think about the Point Cook Road funding. We put 70 odd million, or almost 80 million actually, towards Point Cook Road and Central Avenue, and 700 metres of doubling the road on Central Avenue. So, big lot of money, but it's a relatively, or a substantial lot of money, but Liberals at the same time put together about double the funding to do 5 times the amount of road. Now, that doesn't seem right when they've got to also then build a bridge at the same time over Skeleton Creek. So all of the commitments that they made, I thought were pretty underdone, or they piggybacked on the back of our, of things that we've already funded in the budget. So one of the Liberal commitments was we'll build a police station and salt water and a state emergency service. I mean, that money's already there. That's budgeted. We bought the land. Vic Polar in the process of planning it at the moment. So it was a really funny sort of mix of promises the Libs made, which was, partially things that were underfunded or underthought through, and partially things that Labor was actually already doing. So I didn't take too much from the Liberal commitments. And the other thing that people didn't talk about when I was, hitting doors and hitting the calls, they didn't talk about a Royal Children's Hospital, but they talked about improving maternal, child and health services. And that's the thing we've really got to buckle down on.
Yeah. So we're now talking about children's care. We'll now talk about one of the next policies that you and the Labor government has talked about. Tobias, I believe you're asking this question.
Yep. Yeah, yes, I do. How will the Labor policy of making childcare free benefit families in Point Cook area?
So I think you guys know, as you walk around the streets of Point Cook, just how many children there are. And for every child that gets free kinder, 3 and 4 year old kinder, it's a saving of up to 2,500 per year. So good for families, but in terms of the costs, but also really good for particularly women re-entering the workforce, because if you're childminded at home, it's pretty hard to do work right at the same time. I know that myself. My son yesterday was homesick. There wasn't a lot of work that I could do in between, looking after a kid, right? That's pretty normal. So really good then also for kids. The educators at these kinders, educators at childcare centres do amazing work in terms of education as well. So it's really good for kids, really good for family budgets, really good for the primary caregiver, whether female or male, getting back into the workforce. So there's actually so many benefits, and I'm really glad we've taken the step to do it. I know federally, Labor's working on childcare and making that easier to afford as well, and again with the same intent, improve educational outcomes. Because young people, the further along they get when they're young, the better off the rest of their education is. Any of you guys go to 3-year-old kinder?
Maybe Tobias does.
Nah.
You say Tobias is the smartest of a lot of you? Is that how we know it?
Tobias is smart in his own ways, and we're all smart in our own ways. But
So good answer. You should be we should ask you the questions, Francis.
maybe we can change the whole interview around.
Also, what's your personal experience with childcare in Point Cook with your son?
Yeah. Oh, it's great. So, you know, all the educators there are just so wonderful. You know, he really loves them. And, you know, when you talk to my son about them, like his eyes light up, but also his development. So, you know, he's developmentally at the moment, he's doing a lot of, you know, learning new words and, you know, learning to count and things like this. And, you know, he comes home and he's, you know, counting from 1 through to 10 in his own special way. I'm not saying, you know, he's genius, but his own special way, counting through 1 to 10. And that's because they have, you know, great educators there working on these things all throughout the day. You know, a lot of play education, but, you know, really great experience. So really just so happy with the experience we've had.
Yeah. So now we'll get towards some of our final questions. So another Liberal policy. So the Liberals have another policy that's been talked about, and they've constantly talked about if elected back into office, they will bring back their funded East-West link. And the Labour government has constantly said this is not a good idea. Why do you believe this infrastructure project will not benefit the area of Point Cook?
Great. So I guess I'll throw it back to you guys. So the tunnel that they proposed went from Richmond to Parkville. And any of you guys need to get from Richmond to Parkville very often?
No.
No.
Not really, no.
No. A lot of nodding heads, shaking heads, I should say. No. This is something that is just so far away from Point Cook, from the western suburbs. And the thing that, you know, really defined it for me was we've gone to an election on it multiple times, and the people of Victoria have said no. And for even those people who would potentially benefit from it, those people, you know, who live in Parkville, those surrounding suburbs, who live in Richmond, those surrounding suburbs, they haven't been endorsing the Liberal Party. Right? They've been swinging away from the Liberal Party in a really hard way. So there's no political appetite for it. I thought it was, I mean, economic vandalism might be too strong of a term, but it was a pretty poor effort leading into 2014 when the government signed up contracts, effectively obliging any future government to $1 billion plus payment should the program not go ahead, knowing full well that the opposition was opposed to it. So it's a pretty poor way to run government, to sign up so close to an election and obligate any future government to contracts that were never going to be proceeded with if Labor got elected. Now, the people in Victoria have rejected it multiple times since, and that's because it was really just about, well, there was no really good reason to put that together. So I hope they abandon it eventually, but, you know, just like climate change, they'll probably stubbornly stick it out.
And also, just quickly, because I do remember they have purchased a lot of houses within the Collingwood region, and now, since it hasn't gone through, a lot of those houses have now basically turned, no one's living there, and a lot of squatters have started to live in those houses as well. So that's also another issue that's been, I guess, brought up because of the East-West link.
I can 100% say that was never raised with me in Point Cook during the election. So maybe that's one I'll come back to you on.
Yeah. So just finally, one more question. I don't think I've talked about this with you before, but just quickly, the Liberals have indicated also with the Eastern Werribee precinct a new Peter 12 high school there, and I do remember on the interview Angela was talking about how this is going to benefit the people of Werribee South specifically, since that's going to be a new growth area and it's within our electorate, with a lot of younger students being able to go to this Eastern Werribee precinct school. Do you think this is a good idea, and why or not? Why not?
Yeah, so the premise of it is the problem, which is that Werribee South is going to be a big growing community. So Werribee South is largely farmland and 2 townships within it, and it's really great productive farmland. So if we think about, you know, most of the broccoli, cauliflower, salad greens, for all of Metro Melbourne, come from that area. And that's because it's brilliant, just brilliant farmland, and we've got a lot of really good producers there, working really hard. Then you've got the Wyndham Harbour Township, and then you've got the Werribee South Township. Both of them are actually relatively small in terms of population. So we're talking somewhere near, I think, about 1,700 voters, so probably about 3,500 odd people. Nothing that would justify a high school, right? Just or a P12. It's just not, not a big enough population, but it's also the older demographic in terms of the community of Point Cook itself. So again, I just thought their ideas were misconceived in the way that they set these things up, and hadn't thought it through and hadn't spent the time thinking about it to make these announcements. We do need new schools. We are probably going to need new schools in the East Werribee precinct, but not necessarily new schools that are related to the Werribee South catchment, because it's just not a huge population there. In terms of what we've got in Werribee South, we've actually got a special school there, which the government's done some multi-million-dollar renovations to. If you get the chance to go down there, check it out. It's a really beautiful school. But yeah, some of their ideas are just a bit misconceived on all these, on all their election promises. But I guess the people of Point Cook, looked at the offerings for all the election in front of them, and there wasn't really a substantial change towards the Liberals in terms of their primary vote. So I think the people have taken a bit of a view on it as well.
Yeah, because I think I've been looking at the current two-party preferred. It's about right now 8.4, I think, towards you and the Labor Party. I'm pretty sure.
Yeah, so it's a little bit of swing against the Labor Party, and I said this in an interview well before election day. I said, well, look, before the last state election, we had Malcolm Turnbull being knocked off by the federal Libs, and that was a real driver of votes away from the Libs at the state government. I'm not saying people don't disconnect, are not, can't disconnect federal from state, because they're very good at disconnecting federal and state matters. But there was a drive away to say, well, we're not happy about that. There was also any election, Jill Hennessy represented basically most of the seat, of Point Cook and Altona Meadows and Seabrook. And when you retire after a long-standing member, you're always going to get a bit of a swing against you in terms of a two-party preferred swing and a primary swing. And that's pretty normal because, she's worked across the area, people know her. People have seen some of the amazing things she's done, like voluntary assisted dying, which was, for a person to leave a impact on Australian politics, a policy that was done in Victoria and then adopted nationwide. We're just waiting on the ACT and the Northern Territory to adopt them. She's made a real impact. So I'm not surprised. There's a bit of a swing away from us, but still a relatively okay seat. But it's one of those seats that you just got to work hard. Right, and there's no safe seats left in Victoria, in the country anymore, in my view. So, the people of Point Cook, yourselves, you should expect me to work hard every day and be available and there for you. And so I look forward to, door knocking your houses sometime in the near future.
Yeah, looking forward to it too, Matt. Because I know I've been extending this interview a bit too long, but
That's right.
just quickly as well. I do believe I've been seeing a lot of reports around Liberals have in the past have said that if they do want to get back into government, our seat especially would be one of the targets that they would have to turn blue basically to be able to get back in, because currently they hold, I think, around 27, 28 seats and they need about 44, so they need 16. So
yeah, 45 to hold government. Yeah.
44, 45 to hold government. So they would need probably around about an 8% swing, 9% swing next election. And I think I've heard about, especially our area, even Werribee and Melton, that, these Western suburb seats need to turn blue or else they're not going to be able to get back into government.
Yeah, I mean, whenever they've been in government, they haven't had to hold Point Cook because they haven't, or Altona, they haven't held Altona for, decades upon decades, but they've been able to form government, multiple times before then. Having said that, there was a bit of talk around the Liberals placing more emphasis. But when you hear what the candidate wrote in the newspaper just in the last week, so this is Angela Newhouse, she put forward that there was no support by the Liberal Party in terms of Point Cook, and no support in terms of changing the electoral map here. And so that probably actually tells us more, you know, what does the candidate say about the support from the party? And she's saying there was basically none, and had a real public go at the party. And I think she's even indicated that she's left the Liberal Party on that basis. So if that's the Liberals really, you know, push to win a seat like Point Cook, push to engage people in Point Cook, the lack of engagement speaks volumes. You know, in terms of the Labor Party, you know, I had really good engagement. You know, when I raised issues, people heard me and acted upon them. You know, I raised the issue of Point Cook Road and Central Avenue being dangerous. We secured funding for it. Raised the issue of no pool across the electorate at Point Cook. Got $10 million for it. You know, raised the issue of club rooms and, you know, having access to the community, and, you know, got funding for that too. So people were really receptive and really supportive. The Liberal Party, their attitude was to ignore, you know, in her views, ignore Point Cook. At least that's what's been reported in the newspapers, and that she's left the party as a result of it. So I just don't think they're serious about the Western Suburbs, the Liberal Party. That doesn't mean we rest. You know, we work hard every day. We improve the lives of, you know, the communities that we live in every day, because that's what Labor keeps doing. And, you know, we're known about our building programs, our infrastructure programs. Now, I'm seeing Tobias yawning, which means I've gone on too long.
No,
So
the thing's about to end. That's why. The thing's about to end.
must have been watching the World Cup at the moment. But you know, I know an interview is going poorly when people start yawning in the background.
Nah, the thing's about to end also, the meeting.
Yeah, Tobias just sent me a message saying that we're going to run out of time. So,
let's not do a third one.
Yeah.
No.
So that's the end of our questions, and that's all we have to ask. So Matt, thank you again, Matt, for spending, I guess, over an hour with us. I don't think you would be expecting to spend this much time, but yeah, we're all three of us are really grateful for you to spend any time with us and discuss these important issues within our community.
Thanks so much, guys. I really appreciate it.
Yeah.
Listen, mate, if brains were taxed, you'd get a refund. This is not the time for you to be interjecting, brother. I think you should just calm down and listen, because at this point in time, the state is on its knees, and the weapon-grade idiocy we get from people like this, I don't even know where you're the member for, but I'm sure you won't be there next time.
Your grandfather, Karl Robert Katter, was born in the Qadisha Valley in Lebanon.
And I just told you that he was an Australian.
Given your grandfather's Lebanese, how do you feel about...
No, he's not. He's an Australian. And I resent strongly you describing him as Lebanese. That is a racist comment, and you should take it back, and you should be ashamed of yourself for saying it in public. I'm very angry that you are questioning that my grandfather was an Australian. I don't care where he was born. But I don't care where
I don't understand why you should fly off the handle when I point out your grandfather's from Lebanon.
For my cousin brothers.
And as much as people may think that I've just got this interest in a national robotics strategy because I'm the Minister for Nerds.
Just let's remind us, who gave us the worst recession in 60 years? Paul Keating. Who gave us the highest unemployment since the Great Depression? Paul Keating. Who gave us the highest current account deficit on record? Paul Keating. Who gave us the highest level of foreign debt since the Great Depression? Paul Keating. Who gave us the highest... Oh, it's all right for him to do it, but it's not all right for me. It's all right for him, but not